I go to the next part of my talk, which is how ancient is the Indian civilization? I ask a question and I'll answer it. I'd like to go to astronomy as a means to talk about how old are we as a civilization. When we talk about Indian astronomy, we have to talk about nakshatras and rashi. The nakshatra is a division of the sky in 13 1/3 degree segments, and there are 27 of them. The ancient Indians, they mapped the sky, what they could see. From the horizon, they said the first 13 1/3 degrees is one nakshatra. The next 13 1/3 is the second nakshatra. The next is another. The next is another. And so on, from this horizon to that horizon. But guess what? They didn't stop over there. They knew that below them, something they couldn't see, but also a sky over there. And they divided even the sky they couldn't see into 13 1/3. So if you multiply 13 1/3 by 27, you'll get 360 degrees. A full circle. So the ancient Indians very well knew that we are in a globe. We are not in a flat land. This is an amazing thing that you might not have considered. And here I put the nakshatras in the circle over here. Mrigashira, Pushya, Magha, Uttara, and Purva, Falguni, Chitra, Vishaka, Jyeshta, and so on. And the Rashi was a division of the sky in 30 degree segments. So 12 times 30 is 360 degrees. And this Rashi is what you're most used to when you read horoscopes and so on. Rashi is what you know. The Rashis are over here, Makara, Kumbha, Meena, and all of these things. Now, I put over here the Indian calendar was a lunar solar calendar. It both was there, the lunar as well as solar aspect. So if you follow this over here is a lunar, and associated with the nakshatra over here is a principal month. For example, associated with Chitra, the Chaitra Masa. Associated with the Falguni nakshatra, the Falguni month. And so on. So you had an association of months along with this lunar calendar. There are 27 nakshatras. I'm not going to read this. Take it easy. We're not going to do that. Two texts, Vedanga Jyotisha and Surya Siddhanta, two ancient texts, and both of them recount the same list of nakshatras, which tells us that from a very long period of time, the ancient Indians have been using the same nakshatras. So these nakshatras are Krittika, Rohini, and so on, with Revati and so on. Each of these nakshatras is associated with a principal star. Remember I said the first 13 1/3 degrees? In that portion of the sky, if there is a principal star, they would associate that. For example, Kritika's Eta Tauri, Rohini's Alpha Tauri, also called Aldebaran, and here Revati's Zeta Pisceum, and so on. So you have association of a nakshatra with a principal star. That is the story so far. Here is a night sky with Indian lens. I did this map on February 21st, 2016 to give you an idea of what's going on over here. Now we have to use your imagination a little bit. This is west. This is north, and that is east, and imagine south to be outside, okay? In south somewhere over there. I don't know if you can see these circles from back there, but then there are circles over here. Small circle here, bigger circle, and so on. This entity over here is Dhruva, the star called Dhruva. Dhruva is the Polaris. Remember that the Earth is spinning on an axis which is tilted. It's around 23 degrees or so on. It's tilted at an axis and rotating over here. As the Earth rotates from west to east, all the heavenly bodies appear to go from east to west. But that chart that I'm pointing to, the axis of the Earth is pointing to, that is stationary in the sky. That stationary chart is Dhruva, the Polaris. It's called a Polaris star. All the other stars in the sky appear to be doing a circle around that. So the stars over here to go the small ellipse, this one goes on a larger ellipse, this one on a larger ellipse, and so on. So what you see over here, what I showed here is all the nakshatras, the mapping of the night sky, along with what we know as nakshatras, right? For example, you have Purva Falguni, Uttara Falguni, you got Chitra over here, Hasta over here, you got Ashlesha, Punarvashu, and so on. You see a whole lot of stuff. But what I'd like you to see is it's a globe. It's 360 degrees, it's a circle. You observe that, right? It's 360 degrees. Now, whenever ancient Indians talked about a nakshatra, it was in relation with a certain time. And that time is when the moon appears on the eastern horizon, what section of the sky is it in? In this case, on 21st October 2016, when the moon came over the eastern horizon, I believe at 1800 hours, it was in the Magha Nakshatra. So when we say Magha Nakshatra on that day, because that is the time the moon rose over the eastern horizon. Even if it's a new moon, we can't say new moon, but even the new moon came over there, ancient Indians could compute where the moon is. So they knew that's where the nakshatra was. Thank you. So, how do we do any date using astronomical markers? The ancient Indians had 4 dates. The 4 dates were the solstices and the equinox. If you observe even in your house, the sun does not rise in the east exactly the same point every day. Because of the tilt that I talked about, it appears slightly offset every day. The sun appears to go more and more north until it reaches the northernmost point. Then it retracts and goes south till it goes to the southernmost point and again goes. So as it goes to the northern and southernmost points, you have the solstice, the summer solstice and the winter solstice. At the midpoint, you have the equinox when the night and day are equal. So these are called Shankrantis, the 4 Shankrantis of interest in the Hindu calendar. So these Shankrantis are critically important because those are the dates when something auspicious would be done. If a king wanted to give a grant to somebody or you wanted to do something, it would be done on an auspicious day. So they always mark it saying that when the Krittika Nakshatra, for example, was in summer solstice, then certain something was done. When they do that, immediately we can do a time marking. We can use our astronomical software, for example, and we can work out when in the skies was such a constellation true, and we can have a time marking. I give a couple of examples here. When you say Rama was born in the Chitra Masa, it means the full moon was near the Chitra Nakshatra. So let me just go back a couple of slides and show you. Here's Chitra. So when Rama was born in Chitra Nakshatra, it means that the full moon was here and the sun was somewhere 180 degrees over here, I think in Ashwini. So the sun was 180 degrees away in Ashwini. But remember, if the full moon is here, the sun is 180 degrees away. If the new moon is here, sun is here. So in this case, Rama born Chitra Masa implies this. So just by saying Rama was born Chitra Masa, you have 2 data points jumping out at you immediately. If I say Varsha Ritu means rainy season, began in Ashada Masa. That means the full moon was in Ashada Nakshatra and the sun was in Punarvashi Nakshatra. But at present in India, the rainy season happens when the sun is in the Mrga Nakshatra. So there are 2 nakshatra differences where the time when this statement was written to the current time is because of a phenomenon that I'm going to talk to you about called the precession of equinox. The precession rate is 960 years per nakshatra. So multiplying by 2, you get 1,920 years ago the above statement was true. And that statement is from Kalidasa's Meghaduta. That's how we would date Kalidasa's work. When was it done? Because he's given clues over there. The clues would be things of this nature. Varsha Ritu began in Ashada Masa. So from that we work backwards and say when would that have been true? And this is the way that we use dating using astronomical markers. And this reference, by the way, is from Dr. P.V. Bhatta. Now, Kali Yuga is something that is critical in all of Indian calendars. Whichever calendar we have, they talk about time with respect to Kali Yuga. For example, even Aryabhatta talked about his lifetime with respect to Kali Yuga. The Kali Yuga is an absolute marker. It's a rare planet conjunction of Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Mercury, Sun, and Moon, and Ketu near this Revati Nakshatra, which is Zeta Piscean, on 18th of February 3102 BCE. And that is the beginning of Kali Yuga. And the reference for this is from Surya Siddhanta. Now what I did is, I went in my astronomy software and decided to simulate that date. I went ahead and put the date as February 18th, 3102, just to see, does a modern software correlate with what an ancient Surya Siddhanta might have said? And guess what? This is the eastern horizon, and observe that Revati Nakshatra is here. The sun rises, it is going to be in the Revati Nakshatra. And right where Revati Nakshatra is, you have the sun, you have Mars, you have Mercury, you have Jupiter, you have Moon, you have all the ancient known planets clustered here in Revati Nakshatra. I hope you see that. So here's a powerful validation where we can do it with today's software and see whether if we said the start of Kali Yuga implies these things, is it true? Very much so. Very much so. So you can go over there with software and see that it is very much true. I'd like to talk a little bit about science. There are 3 cycles called Milankovitch Cycle. One of them is where the sun goes, when the Earth goes from an elliptical orbit to a circular orbit. And this is called eccentricity, and this is a 100,000 year cycle. Okay? There's one more cycle where the Earth, I said it's tilted, right? The tilt varies between 22.2 degrees and 24.5 degrees. And this tilt happens in a 41,000 year cycle. A third cycle is the precession of equinox. If you're played with a top as a child, you remember that when you play the top spins really, really fast, right? Along with that spin, sometimes there's a slow wobble. Can you visualize that? If you play the top as a child, you visualize a very rapid spin and there's a slow wobble. So our Earth is doing that. So like I said, it is tilted at 23 degrees, and when it is rotating, it's got a 24-hour rotation, right? It's pretty rapid. But along with this rotation is a very slow wobble. And this wobble takes 26,000 years to complete. This is the precession of equinox, which is exceedingly important for us, for Indian astronomy, to date several of our incidents in our itihasas. So please remember this, precession of equinox. I'd also like to go back to this in 3102 BCE and point to you a couple of things, maybe not this, I'll go to the earlier one. And I'd like to point to you here, this is Polaris at the center, like I said, it points to Polaris. And I'd also like you to pay attention to this star, which is called Abhijit. Abhijit is a star Vega. Vega in Greek, Abhijit in English. And Abhijit is 1 circle, 2, 3, 4, 5 circles away in 2016. I'd like you to just remember that as I talk just a little further. There was a time when Abhijit was a pole star. In Mahabharata, Vanaparva, chapter 230, verses 8 to 11, is a dialogue with Indra and Skanda. So basically, it says, contesting against Abhijit, the Nakshatra Krittika, Pleiades, went to Vana the summer solstice to heat the summer. Then the star Abhijit slipped down in the sky. Very, very cryptic statement that was said by Indra. And people started saying, what is this? Stars just don't drop in the sky. This is utter rubbish. Now, if we analyze it, Professor Dr. P.V. Vartha came along and said, Krittika was at the summer solstice 24,000 years ago. Remember, I said we can do dating if we know when, what nakshatra was and what period of time. We can say it was 24,000 years ago, Krittika was at summer solstice. Abhijit was a pole star 14,000 years ago, and in the future, 15,000 years from now, it will again become the pole star. Which means Indian rishis have been observing the skies from 24,000 years ago. It is a staggering amount of time. Staggering. It completely belies everything that we have been taught, everything that we believe in. Because we are told that there was no civilization. They were cavemen. They had clubs and they had no language, they had nothing and so on. Civilization only came after the flood, and the Greeks brought it along, Sumerians brought it along, and so on. But this is staggering. We have to deal with this. These data points exist in our itihasas, and we have to deal with them. Are these forgeries or are these real? So, monkey have, monkey will do. I have a software, so I'm going to simulate it. So I went ahead and simulated 14,000 years ago what happened in the same planetarium software. It may not be that accurate 14,000 years ago, but guess what? Do you see this Abhijit? Right here in the center, it's a pole star. 14,000 years ago. Powerful validation from the present about an event in the past that Abhijit was indeed the pole star 14,000 years ago. I'd like to point out a couple of more data points. One, Krittika Nakshatra. This is a picture of Krittika that I took. Krittika is a Pleiades. In Greek it's called Pleiades. It's like a small kite in the sky. It precedes the Orion constellation. So the Taittiriya Samhita refers to Krittika in the winter solstice. And this corresponds to a date of 8350 BCE, 8350 BCE. There's a statement in the Taittiriya Samhita that refers to this. So you have to deal with this. You have to deal with this. Taittiriya Samhita contains this. What do we make out of it? Did somebody observe it over there? Did somebody back calculate it? Were perhaps the Indians so smart in multi-body dynamics and differential calculus about 10,000 years ago, they could work out multi-body dynamics, work backwards in time and say, yeah, Krittika was over there, this was over there accurately. Or was an eyewitness seeing these things and using an existing mapping of the sky to do these things? We have to talk about it, right? As scientists and people who think, people to think about it. The Shatapada Brahmana, this refers to Krittika, the vernal equinox, the summer solstice vernal equinox. This corresponds to 2950 BCE, one more date out of the past. There is an author called Nilesh Nilakant Oak who refers to an incident in the Mahabharata where Vyasa tells Dhritarashtra day before the war, "My dear king, Arundhati, who is revered by righteous all over the three worlds, has left her husband Vasishtha behind." Made no sense for a very long period of time. You will remember that in most Hindu weddings, the couple is asked to look at Arundhati Vasishtha in the sky. Most people can't see this, say, "Yeah, I saw it." But the point is, Arundhati Vasishtha is a binary. And it's a very strange kind of binary. You can't see the naked eye as binary. This is the stars called Mesa Alcor in current star terminology. You can't see that there are two stars. But if you see through a telescope, you can clearly see that Vasishtha and Arundhati are two stars. Most binary stars are such that one of the stars is gravitationally bound to the other and goes around them. Arundhati Vasishtha, the unique thing about is they are not gravitationally bound, but they co-orbit each other. They co-orbit each other. Somehow the Indian rishis knew about this and positioned that as an ideality for the Indian marriage, that there's not one spouse who's always orbiting the other, but both are co-orbiting each other. So about this one, the important thing is there is this reference that Arundhati has left her husband behind. What did that mean? So Nilesh Nilakant Oak says that October 16, 55-61 BCE, which he positions for the Mahabharata war, he says because of precession of equinox and others, it appeared that when you see it in the night sky, the tilt was such that it would appear that Arundhati is first. It's a rotation. The rotation is in this way. It would appear that Arundhati is leading Vasishtha. Whereas today, in 2016, you can see Arundhati is behind Vasishtha. Very, very strange things, but in these days, like you're dealing with exceedingly old things. So the second part of my question, how old was the civilization? I brought to you several data points going back almost 24,000 years ago. Now, you may ask me, how do we deal with this? I don't know. But the fact is, these things do exist. They exist and we have to make sense out of that and build it to a tapestry of our narrative on what we think is our civilization. So there are allegations of inflow of knowledge from the Greeks and the Babylonians into India. These allegations were made by the British Indologists who, when they encountered certain things, they said that this comes from outside. So the question is, what did the Indians know? We know that we have several knowledge sources, right? We have the Shruti, that which is heard. We have the Vedas. We have the Samhitas. Samhitas are mantras, hymns and prayers. We have Brahmanas, which are commentaries on hymns and rituals. And we have Aranyakas, rituals and philosophy. And Upanishads, which were philosophy. These were deeply intellectual works. The Vedas were revealed works, and other things were, when the commentary was made, you had to wonder about the amount of intellectual content that went into the minds of the authors, who either got it in revealed states of minds, or were able to visualize these realities and write them. But enormous pieces of information. We also have Smriti, that which is, remember, the 6 Vedantas, the grammar, meter, astronomy, rituals, itihasas, we know Mahabharata, Ramayana, texts on dharma, artha, kama, moksha, Puranas, history, kavya, poetics works, Bhashyas, commentaries and shrutis, sutras and shastras of various schools, nibandhas, politics, medicine, culture and arts. I put this over here exhaustively to give to you an idea that we had a bedrock and a matrix available for intellectual expression. The people in various periods of time were able to find intellectual expression in their chosen area of work, whether it was astronomy, whether it was medicine, politics, culture, maybe some arts, whatever, grammar. They could find expression within these frameworks that were laid from a very ancient period of time. I just want to emphasize that, and that's the reason why I brought this up over here. And what did the Indians know? We know that there were several schools and gurus of the past. For example, there's Nyaya, Yoga, Vaisheshika, Sankhya, Purva Mimamsa, Uttara Mimamsa. These are all schools of philosophy. And when you read these one-line blurbs that I put over here, you'll see that these were exceedingly scientific in the way they were looking at things. For example, Nyaya stated, all knowledge is not intrinsically valid. Staggering, right? Staggering. This is a profound aphorism that's coming to us from the past that we can relate with today completely. Most knowledge is not valid unless proven. And truth exists exists whether we human beings know it or not. Akshapada Gautama, one of the famous rishis of the past, who propounded who was an exponent of this. He may not have founded this, but he's a famous exponent. Yoga, we know yamas, niyama, asana, and all of these things. Patanjali was not the founder, he was just a codifier. He wrote all the sutras, yoga sutras. Vaisheshika, Kanada was one of the rishis who was very famous with the Vaisheshika that relied on perception and inference. I'm going to talk a little bit about this a little later to see what scientific information we can plumb out of this. Sankhya is a systematic enumeration and rational examination by the Rishi Kapila. Mathematics comes out of this. Combinatoric logic and other things, they come out of this. Purva Mimamsa is a reflection, consideration, profound thought, investigation, examination and discussion by the Rishi Jainini. Finally, what we call as Vedanta today, Uttara Mimamsa, which most of us today are familiar with. There are about 10 schools including Advaita Vedanta, Vishishta Advaita and so on. And Adi Shankara was a very famous Rishi of the past who we know has written commentaries on these things. Indians knew a lot. That's a bottom line. There's a lot of things in the past, and in the slides I'm going to show a little more. Two scenes from Mohenjodaro, scene number 420 and scene number 430. This scene shows Prajapati with certain figures over here, 4 figures over here. And in this paper by this Professor Abhijit in 1993, he claims that this shows the equinox and solstices in 3000 BCE. This one in scene number 430, this shows the night sky in 7th February 3104, very close to the Kali Yuga date. These 7 here are the planets, the 7 planets. It shows very close to the Kali Yuga date. So when you see a scene just by itself without a scholarly interpretation, it's difficult for us to make the connections, make the correlations and connections. But this professor, if you read this paper, you'll find how he's done it. Yajnavalkya, one of the very famous rishis of the past, he has a cosmology, and his cosmology is amazingly modern, and he did not have the benefit of telescopes or any such thing. Because of Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which he writes a lot, we believe that was done around 3000 BCE, and in his cosmology, what we see is that everything on earth is wrapped in water. Water is wrapped in air is wrapped in the sky is wrapped in the world of the planets, and the world of planets is wrapped in Aditya. He got this wrong. The world of sun is wrapped in the world of Chandra, moon. He thought the moon was beyond the sun. Other than that, he got everything right over here. The world of the moon is wrapped in the world of nakshatras, the stars. The world of nakshatras is wrapped in the world of devas. It's a little metaphysical. The world of devas and the world of Indra. The world of Indra is wrapped in the world of Prajapati, which is the galactic center, the Milky Way. He even was able to identify that, the galactic. And I over here in a Facebook post to Sahana, I had encoded some of these things in the Hindu measure of time, how from the Brahma's day and night, you get the galactic year at 230 million years. Galactic year means how much of time does it take for the solar system to go one round around the Milky Way, around the black hole of the Milky Way, and come back to the original position. From our ancient texts, the figure comes out to be 288 million years. In 2013, a scientific study was done among the universities in the US, and the figure is between 220 to 250 million years ago. And Yajnavalkya was able to do that. So, amazing things over here. Some ancient texts, I'm not going to read these things. A whole lot of them. Surya, for example, Vedanga Jyotisha. Michael Witzler uses literary styles and says that it's final centuries of BCE. However, there is astronomical phenomena contained there which suggests 1400 BCE. And Surya Siddhanta, Vasishtha Siddhanta, Pythagoras Siddhanta, Romaka, Pulisa. Then coming on to the Siddhantic period, Aryabhatiya from Aryabhata, Panchasiddhantika from Varahamihra, Mahabhaskariya, Laghu Bhaskariya, Siddhanta Shiromani, a very famous professor called Bhaskara too. And coming on to more modern periods, Neelakantan Somayaja is Tantra Samgra. So then here are some texts that I put over here which are lost. We knew that they existed, but they no longer are available. You can't read it from there, but we just don't have those things anymore. Varahamihra in a commentary states that these 4 texts have become obsolete. Even in Varahamihra's time, they have become obsolete, meaning that those texts were so ancient that by the time Varahamihra lived, he could no longer use those texts. So he's saying that Vasishtha, Pythagoras, Romaka have already become obsolete. Some discoveries, the Rigvedic calendar is 360 days, 12 times 30, but averages to 365 or 6 years. They add a correcting month, an intercalcium month every 30 days, every 5 years, and you have that. Vega Jyotish records astronomical phenomena exceedingly old. I just talked about Sage Yajnavalkya, who propounded a heliocentric model. In Chatapada Brahmana, he also measured the distance from the Earth to the Sun, Earth to the Moon, at 108 times the diameter of Earth and Sun. As a measure of the diameter of Earth or the Moon, he tried to estimate what is the distance from the Earth to the Sun or the Earth to the Moon, and he claimed that the figure was 108 times, that entity they were dealing with. The modern figures are 107.5 and 110.6. Surya Siddhanta, it records very complex astronomical time measurements. 2000 years ago, Indians proposed stars were like sun but further away. Aryabhatta had a partial heliocentric model, and he had math formula to compute eclipses. And it is Aryabhatta's formulas that we're using even today when we use a panchang to see time. We use Aryabhatta's formulas. Valamira said the same force that holds objects to Earth also holds celestial bodies in space. An affirmation of gravity is coming out over here. Brahmagupta calculated the circumference of the Earth at 36,000 kilometers. The true figure is 40,000 kilometers. Bhaskara too is a famous professor and maybe one of the most important figures that I admire from history. He calculated the precision of equinox. Remember I told you the slow movement at 26,000 years? He calculated that at 25,461 years, whereas the true figure is 25,771 years that we estimate today. An amazing, amazing figure over there. Sayana, who was a minister in the Vijayanagar kingdom, who's very famous for his commentaries in the Rig Veda, he computed the speed of light, 1315 current era, at 2,202 yojanas and half nimisha. This translates into our modern metrics to 300,000 kilometers per second, whereas the true figure is 299,792 kilometers per second. You have thought that Michael Morsley experiments are the ones that first computed the speed of light in Europe, but here you are, Sayana, minister to Prime Minister Vijayanagar. He did this. And Subhash Tak has got an interesting article in this in Swarajya magazine, perhaps 3 months back, and you can read this. Surya Siddhanta, he talks about astronomy, time cycles, and planetary diameters. Okay? He talks of Mercury having a diameter of 3,000 miles, whereas the true figure is 3,032 miles. Saturn at 73,882 miles, the true figure is 74,580 miles. Mars at 3,700, true figure is 4,200. Venus is estimated at 4,000, whereas the true figure is 7,500. Jupiter at 41,000, true figure is 86,000. Now we shouldn't accept that. You say, what on earth? Surya Siddhanta 700 BCE talks about these blobs of light that they see in the sky as not as blobs of light, but as planets having a size that is referred to over here, and they didn't have telescopes. How on earth did they do that? How on earth did they know that? We are told that Galileo, after he discovered the telescope, Europe, were the first people who were able to estimate some of these planetary diameters. But here you have, today you can download Google Books, go there, Surya Siddhanta, translation by Burgess, take it and read it, and you'll find these things. How did they do it? They did it with this astronomy, Indian school trigonometry. In trigonometry, if you are the observer standing here and the full moon was directly overhead, and the sun was 180 degrees away over here, and you found a right angle triangle, and they knew that the distance from the observer to the moon is 1, and the distance from the observer to the sun is 400 if this angle is 1/7 of a degree. Indians knew that. And using that, and remember, I told you that they had nakshatras, right? Division of the night the sky, not just night, even day sky. In each nakshatra, they had finer divisions, just like you have Riemann sun today. If you know mathematics, Riemann sun, Lebesgue integral, Lebesgue sum, and so on. These are finer divisions in your XY axis to have finer and finer approximation of area. Now, our ancient Indians, in the Nakshatra, they had finer resolution because they could track the movement of the heavenly body more precisely. That precision was required for Tithi. Tithi is a measure of time that they required for auspicious events. Remember, Muhurta is 24 minutes. They also required Tithi as a measure of doing things. They could measure that if they had finer divisions of the nakshatras. And using that, they could see the time rate of change of bodies over there and make estimates of all of these things. That's how they did it. So give it to them. They were amazing. 700 BCE, we did it. But you don't study any of these things, do you? None of your books talk about these things. Let me raise some order to talk about this. Some ancient mathematicians, Brahmagupta, very famous for quadratics, very famous for solution of linear quadratic indeterminate equations. He wrote Brahmasputra Siddhanta and this one transmitted by Arabs. I'm going to talk about this a little later. He first wrote about rules for zero operation of positive and negative numbers and several trigonometric tables and so on. The so-called Pell's equation. Pell's equation is something that Euler solved in the 17th century, and they thought that's the first time they solved it. But way back in 519, current era, Bhaskara had solved it. So, Brahmagupta, not Bhaskara. Bhaskara 1 and Bhaskara 2, they work with zero positional arithmetic approximation for the sine. Sine theta was this approximation, which is an amazing mathematics at that time period of time. Bhaskara 2 was a person from Bijapur in Karnataka. He moved to Ujjain in Madhya Pradesh and became a professor over there in the astronomy department. He wrote Siddhanta Shiromani, and he was the one who calculated the precision of equinox, including this differential calculus. You see this entity over here in modern notation? He discovered it. Differential calculus is not an invention of Newton and Leibniz and others over there. It's right back over here. Madhava Sangrama Trishur, a whole lot of infinite series and so on. George Joseph Geevarghese, he says that Madhava's mathematics was transmitted to Europe a century before Newton by the church. Very, very critical things to know. And on to my last question here now. So I talked about Aryan invasion theory. I talked about how ancient were the Indians. I talked about what did the Indians know. Now I'm down to my last question. Did knowledge flow out of India? Because there's an allegation that India was on the receiving end of Greek and Babylon knowledge. So I'd like to see, do we have any proof that counters that, and do we have things that state the opposite? I claim that the knowledge outflows from India in various periods of time. We can periodize these things. Pre-Pythagoras 2000 BCE, during Pythagoras 500 BCE, post-Alexander 300 BCE, Buddhist and Hindu outflows to China and Southeast Asia, during the Abbasid Empire 700 current era, Delhi Sultanate 1000 current era, Mughal period 1500 to 1700, and the Colonial Period. In every period of this time, there is evidence for knowledge outflows from India. I put this map here, 1300 BCE, and I'd like to bring up this data point from Subhashka. The drying up of the Saraswati and climate change led to westward migration about 1900 years BCE. So these people from here migrated into this region of the world, which I have shown in a bigger map over here. What you see here are the Mitanni people, the Hatti people, the Kassite people, and so on. The Hatti people are the Hittites. Hittites is an anglicization. Hatti is their actual name. In Hatti, there was a city called Purushottama, the city of man. Okay, that clearly indicates an Indian origin. And the Mitannis were people who spoke Sanskrit, and in their treaties with Egypt and so on, the pharaohs of Egypt, they invoked Indra, Varuna, and others as witnesses for the treaties that they were signing, clearly showing a Vedic origin. The people in the Kassite people are over here near Dilmun. Dilmun is today in Bahrain. In Bahrain today we have found Indus Valley seals and so on. But even in the ancient past, there's evidence that they were the receiving end of information from this area of the world. So 1300 BCE and up to 1900 BCE, the stage is set where information flows from India outward into the Babylonian period of the world. Pythagoras, around 500 BCE, couple of books over here. Albert Burke in 1901 dashed Apastamba Sarva Sutra. He makes a claim that Pythagoras traveled to southern India and particularly to Kanchipuram. Today we associate Kanchipuram, the capital of the Pandyas, Pallavas, who perhaps lived in the 6th century and so on. But Kanchipuram has been a place of learning for an exceedingly long period of time. And Pythagoras apparently learned over there. Ian Marlowe, another Westerner, 1954, writes about Hinduism and Buddhism in Greek philosophy. And G.R.S. Mead, 1901, Apollonius of Tyana, also talks about this. There's a paper over here you can download and read, which talks about Pythagoras and the doctrine of transmigration. Pythagoras went to India, came back to Greece. He was stalked as a madman. They said as a madman. He's a madman because he stopped eating meat. He'd only eat fruits, nuts, and other such things and not eat meat anymore. He became vegetarian. Second, he started a Gurukulam style of teaching where he would have an inner circle where he'd teach them revealed wisdom and an outer circle which is on their way to coming to the inner circle. Very similar to how Gurukulams are done in India. He started that, which is inherited by further philosophers like Socrates, Plato and others, inherited the same Gurukulam style of thing. He believed in transmigration of souls. He believed that after death the soul would go out and go to somebody else. So very clearly there is evidence of this being exposed to Indian thought and learning. Remember I talked about Kanada. Kanada is a rishi who lived around 600 BCE, which are conservative dated. And I'd like to talk about Democritus who lived in 460 BCE. Now, Kanada in Vaisheshika Sutra says to understand Brahman through understanding the natural world. He says there are 9 classes of reality and infinity. Creation is made up of atoms. Atman pervades material. 7 classes of experience, substance, quality, activity, generality, and so on. Types of substances, color, taste, smell, touch, and so on. Subhash Kap also shows laws of motion. Democritus, on the other hand, is referred to as the father of modern science in the Eurocentric ways of looking at the world. It is known that he traveled to Asia, India, Ethiopia, and returned to Greece with something he called natural philosophy. He said creation is made up of atoms of different types that degenerate. There are 2 types of knowing, legitimate with intellect and illegitimate with sense objects. This is deeply tied to Vedanta. Those of you who know about Vedanta know there are 2 types of knowing. One with knowledge, with the differentiation of Vidya and Avidya. It comes over there. And this legitimate and illegitimate is a direct correspondence with Vedantic knowledge. He said Earth is a sphere, universe made of atoms and chaos colliding to make bigger worlds. We don't learn about Kanada. None of you have probably seen him in any textbook or so on. But you probably have learned that Democritus was a country with all these things. One more of the examples is the erased history of India. Post-Alexander, 330 BCE, here you have the Seleucid Empire that shrunk down by a certain period of time. I put this over here to show that Alexander ordered the translation of astronomical works in Persia and Mesopotamia for his uncle, a very famous uncle, Aristotle. Aristotle had asked his nephew, Alexander, to bring back all the texts from the lands that he was going to, and he got the translations over to him. And guess who inherited them? It was inherited by Hipparchus, who lived in 190 BCE. Hipparchus is a famous figure. Today, Western Indology and Eurocentric views tell us that Hipparchus invented trigonometry, and Aryabhatta learned trigonometry from Hipparchus. Let's see the evidence. Surya Siddhanta already contains chord formulas. Aryabhatta composed sine table 3.5 degree segments with Jya, Koja, and so on. Pingala was a famous mathematician who lived in 400 BCE and wrote Chanda Shastra, where he wrote about combinatorics and binomials. Astronomer called Krittika, who lived in 500 BC, proposed precession of the equinox rate at 36,000 years. He said 1 degree every 100 years. The strong school of proposition logic among Jains and Vedanta and so on. The knowledge transmission from here is by Aristotle and the Library of Alexandria in 325 BCE. On this side, Hipparchus proposed a chord table with 7.5 degree segments, proposed the same rate of precision as Krittika, 36,000 years, and he has got something that looks like enumerative combinatorics, which is probably picked up from Pingala, and his propositional logic is rooted in Stoicism. Stoicism is something very similar to Vedantic ways of looking at the world. These are all offshoots. And in that period of time, it was fashionable in Greece to start these kind of schools. Again, it's rooted in Brahma. Ptolemy, a recent paper over here, a book in 1985 by Robert R. Newton, says that he claims Ptolemy was a liar and a plagiarist. He says nothing that Ptolemy writes about Almagest is original, and he copied everything. He suggests that his tables are calculated by Eratosthenes in 276 BCE. Ptolemy is important because the Western Indologists said Aryabhatta copied from Ptolemy. and Ptolemy's epicycle model was used in India, and so on and so forth. What we see about Eratosthenes, 276 BCE, mathematician, astronomer, but very important for us, he was the chief librarian at Alexandria. The library at Alexandria was set up so that it could transmit information from the east to the west. Okay? That library was set up during Alexander's time, destroyed by Julius Caesar in around 40 BCE, and when Rome adopted Christianity in around 325 current era, the Pope ordered destruction 341 CE, burning almost the entire library over there. It was further destroyed by Muslims in 690 current era, and this library is the one that facilitated sourcing of knowledge from the east and transmitting it to the west. And this gentleman was the chief librarian over there. And he talked about circumference of the earth, tilt of the earth, distance from earth to sun, diameter of the earth, of the sun as a function of the earth's diameter, and so on. He was in Stoicism and the Plato school of thought. Once again, you see the Indian DNA and the hybrid going all the way over to Greek thought. It's not the other way around. It is from this way to this way. So about knowledge transfers, I'm coming to the end of my talk, so let me quickly hurry up. Knowledge transfers, like we talk about the Abbasid period. Now the Abbasid period is around 700 current era, stretching all the way from Sindh. Sindh fell, if you remember, 711 current era once Bir Qasim came to that, conquered that part of Sindh. That became part of this Abbasid Empire and stretched all the way from here up to, from northern Africa up to Spain. Now Al-Fazari translated Brahmagupta's Brahmasputra Siddhanta to Arabic, which was brought by Pandits from Sindh to Baghdad. It contained numerals, math, astronomy. Now the Muslims are not plagiarizers. They clearly said we got this knowledge from Hindus, and they called it Sindh, Hind and Arakat. There was Kanka or Manka, who was an Indian physician, the court of Harun al-Rashid in 776 in Baghdad. He translated Shushruta Samhita to Persian. This was used by Avicenna, also called Ibn Sina, whose medical texts form the foundation of European medicine. Another person, Abid Allah ibn Ali, 9th century, translated Charaka Samhita, which is Ayurveda, to Arabic and Persian. This was transmitted from Baghdad to Spain. Al-Kindi was a very famous scientist of Arabs who lived in 801 current era. He had the enviable situation that he had access to Greek texts as well as Hindu texts, and he translated Greek, Indian, and wrote many works in math, medicine, astronomy, chemistry, music, philosophy, and so on. In the years from 1000 to 1700, many scientific works, math, medicine, astronomy, chemistry, toxicology, religion, arts, all of these were translated from Sanskrit into Arabic. Al-Biruni, we know, he accompanied Ghazni. He knew Persian, Arabic, Sanskrit, Greek, and Hebrew. He wrote his magnum opus with his Kitab Tariq al-Hind, where he translated works in many subjects. We know that one of these Tughlaqs in 1365, when he plundered Nagarkot, he acquired a library of 1,300 Sanskrit books, translated some of them to Persian. Zain ul Abidin, who lived in Kashmir, he was one of the first guys who had a bilateral translation. Not only did he translate from Sanskrit into Persian, but he also got some Persian texts translated into Sanskrit, which was an admirable thing to do. Till then it was an outflow. So here we see one of the instances where knowledge is being plotted. Akbar had works translated from Sanskrit to Persian, and a very famous figure, Dara Shikoh, who was the son of Shah Jahan, he made Persian translations of Upanishads, 50 works. And it was through Dara Shikoh's works that the French or the Europeans got to know with the Upanishads the first time. How was this transferred to Europe? Now remember, Europe had a Christian Europe and a Muslim Europe. In the 12th century, there was a Toledo school of translation on the Christian side of Europe, whose only job was to translate from Arabic to Latin. One name from the past, Gerard of Cremona, he translated 87 Arabic texts to Latin at Toledo on math, astronomy, and medicine. One more Constantine African, he translated Arabic medical texts. So I put this little picture here to give you a mnemonic of what's happening over here, mental picture. Indic knowledge went out in several ways. One is a direct transmission route to Europe. Another one is a transmission through ancient Greeks and Romans, which in one part of the world was destroyed by Christians. But in another part of the world, meaning in places like Lebanon, Beirut, Israel, and other places, it was not destroyed by Christians. This knowledge from India into Greeks survived, and they were inherited by the Muslims. The Muslims also destructively got knowledge from India from 711 onwards and so on. So that knowledge also went in and was consolidated into Arabic, and all of these things in Spain found their translation into Latin in Europe. That was the injection of Indian knowledge into Europe, which is a precursor to the Renaissance. Most of the Renaissance period was knowledge that was obtained in this manner. Quickly talk about Europe, 1200 to 1300 transfer of knowledge. Marco Polo, John of Monte Corvino, who was a Catholic missionary in Mylapore. Jordanus Catalani, who was the first bishop of Cologne. In 1320s, he wrote this book called Milankovitch, which you can download from Google and read it. And the missionaries Orderic and James of Ireland in 1300s who were traveling around India, collecting books and taking them. This is a direct transmission route from Europe into Europe. 1400 Europeans, Nicola di Conti in Vijayanagar, Mylapore, Koilan, Kochi, Calicut, and so on. His works were influential for the cartography of the 15th century. Then Alphonse Nikitin of Russia in 1470, Vasco da Gama, we know about him. And this book over here talks about several early Europeans in the 15th century who came to India and got knowledge for direct transmission. 1500s, the Portuguese were the ones who did a lot of voyages to India. In fact, 1500, there were 13 ships, 1500 men. Vasco da Gama's second trip and Vasco da Gama's third trip. And this picture, I think from Sahana, went to Lisbon recently and shared this picture that shows these scientists looking out into the sea, because the sea is where they got their knowledge from, Portugal. And these scientists, Pedro Nunes and João de Castro, fourth viceroy to India, they were critical in the transmission of Indian knowledge into Portugal and into Europe. So let's talk about European plagiarism and Renaissance. Remember that once the Pope and the Knights Templar got an act together, they decided to get Europe rid of Muslims. They attacked the Muslims in Spain and they got rid of them, and they instituted something called, forget what it is.
Inquisition.
Inquisition, thank you. Inquisition. They instituted the Inquisition so that they could purge Europe of Muslim knowledge. So, any Muslim birth was seen as seeking knowledge from Satan and invited savage retribution. So, Renaissance European scholars hid their sources and passed on Greek, Indian words as original knowledge. In Europe of that period, the noblemen would send their eldest sons to Muslim Spain saying that they had better knowledge than us. So, you go there and study. That was the way it was done. So, they would get their knowledge from the Muslims and come back into Spain. But after the fall of the Inquisition period, they started ridding Spain of all the Muslim influences. So all these guys promptly hid their sources and plagiarized. Suddenly you had a whole bunch of people saying, I invented this, I discovered this. Whereas the reality is, these are people who are primitive. They were living in the dark ages of Europe, who were coming out of the plagues. The plagues got almost 1 million, 2 million lives in those days. There were people who were living under the oppression of the church. The church controlled their mind, their peasants. The noblemen controlled other taxes and other part, the church controlled another part. How could these people suddenly tumble into science and learning? This is one of the greatest dishonesties of our current times, which none of us challenge. We readily buy in the narrative of Renaissance as a flowering of European thought and other such things. Whereas the reality is, there was knowledge that was injected and caused a critical mass which enabled Europe to bootstrap into a modern period. So European works in astronomy, math, medicine were greatly credited by Indian and Greek works, ensuring European knowledge ignores citation, thereby they are plagiarizing. So I won't talk much about this, I know that I'm very late over here, but in the colonial period, any period of time you take it, you can find out whether it was the French or the British or others, they were at the forefront of getting knowledge, not just gold. They were out there fanning and getting Indian textbooks. Maybe I should just tell one anecdote. When I went to Pondicherry, I picked up this book in the French Institute of Pondicherry. This is a Bibliotheca Malabarica. This book is just a compendium of the number of books that were acquired by Bartholomew Ziegenbalg in 1705, which is a Dutch in Tranquebar. As soon as he came, this missionary found out and collected all the books he could. And this book is just a listing of the books that he copied. A 200-page book. So that gives you an idea of what they did. Also, they have some of the largest collections of Surya Siddhanta in Pondicherry. They just went out and got enormous numbers of works in Tamil Nadu and other such things. Like to talk about decimation of Sanskrit. Sanskrit has been the language of knowledge generation. 10th century onwards, the Islamic invasion of India destroyed temples, libraries, killed Brahmins, converted the masses, and led to a severe disruption of Sanskrit. Persian became the preferred language that people would use, and Sanskrit went into the background. Sanskrit did not die. Sanskrit was patronized by the people in the countryside. All over India, there were people who would give a portion of the produce of the land to the local temple, the village temple. And the village temple, living on the handouts of the farmers in the area, would support the temple and the pandit or maybe a pathashala or somebody who would continue with Sanskrit and learning of Indic knowledges. That survived till the 18th century when British taxation completely destroyed that. No longer was a farmer able to even support himself, let alone giving a portion of his produce to the temple. So once that was gone, the support system was completely gone, including their employment machinations. They said that only if you know English you could get a job, which means that people, complete loss of public support for Sanskrit replaced by English as a preferred language. So for the last 200 to 300 years, we have been laboring under this distancing of ourselves from our past. We have lost the connection to our past because of this. We are all anglicized, we are all mind colonized in various degrees, and unfortunately we have lost the connection. 1950s, India saw the defeat of the recommendation of Joint Parliamentary Commission on Sanskrit by the Nehru Congress government and a rejection of its recommendations. The Joint Parliamentary Commission's task was to say what should modern India adopt as the medium of instruction, and they came with a recommendation saying Sanskrit will enable us to connect to our past and to read our original knowledge sources in our original tongue. Unfortunately, it was defeated by one vote. It was defeated by one vote and thrown out, and we promptly saw we are now the product of that. We are all over here the product of this defeat. We have not studied Sanskrit, we have distanced ourselves further and further away. Though we have our own destiny in our own hands, we have not been able to do this. I should have put one more point over there. About 2 years ago in the Manmohan era, there was a second Joint Parliamentary Commission on Sanskrit, where the recommendations were we should study Sanskrit to see the impact it had on the social events of the country. In other words, there was a politicization of Sanskrit to see how it led to classes in India, the backward castes and so on. That is the reason they proposed studying Sanskrit. Today, the isolation and loss is complete. Sanskrit scholarship exists for the most part outside India. Its past and future narratives are controlled from outside. One example is Sheldon Pollock at Columbia. And if you read The Battle for Sanskrit by Raja Malhotra, I think you would get to know a lot of what is happening over here. Well, this is my closing remarks. Thank you very, very much. You have been a very patient audience listening to me for so long. So the only one takeaway I'd like from here is the present day and future scholars need to connect to India's past for the continuity of our civilization. We are at a point where we have a punctured civilization. None of us over here can connect to the past. We have lost the connection to the past. We don't study about that. We have erased periods in Indian history. There's nobody who's challenging NCERT and other such textbooks going over there and saying, hey, there are so many rishis of the past who invented so many things. How come I don't know the name of a single rishi? Nobody's out there asking these questions. Nobody out there is challenging a narrative that everything of value in India came from outside India, from the Babylonians and the Greeks and so on. The reason we can't be too harsh on ourselves, this 300 period that the British imposed on us to isolate us from our past and make us anglicized has resulted in us losing our connection. So we need to make very strong efforts to correct the chronologies, connect to the past, and for that we need Sanskrit knowledge that can patronage for our primary sources. I think that is about it. Thank you very much.